Yeah, we are glad to have you here. This is the creation versus evolution crash class.
Okay.
We always like to give a background, really, of the creation, the fall, the flood, and the dispersion after Babel, Genesis 1 through 11, which is key to understanding the rest of Scripture, we believe, and it's also key to understanding science. So Genesis 1 and 2 talk about creation, God's creation, his creative power and the design. And so when we look in nature, what do we see? We see evidence of design in nature. But then as we look around the world around us, we also see evidence of death and decay and things going downhill. We see evil and suffering entering the world. Well, the Bible has a good answer for that in Genesis 3 to 5 in the events of the fall and the things that happened subsequent to that. Then in Genesis 6 through 8, we see evidence of destruction and flood. The Bible clearly gives three very in detail descriptions of this flood. And when we look around the world, we see evidence all over the world in the rock layers themselves of things that were that were destroyed by water. And then we see evidence also of erosion and other earth forces after the flood, which explains a good deal of the geology we see today. And we'll be talking about that later in this series. And then Genesis 9 through 11 talks about the dispersion after Babel. As Noah and his family got off the ark, God told them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And they were not real obedient in that. They wanted to stay together and build a name for themselves. But God said, nope, enough is enough. And he came down and forced them really to spread out by confusing the languages. Now that's the biblical framework. And we have no problem admitting we believe that biblical framework. We embrace it. But there are a lot of anti-God philosophies and anti-God professors and so on who just laugh at it, scoff at it, mock at it, and say, just totally reject that biblical framework. The problem is if you reject the biblical framework, you really have no firm foundation to go on to study the Bible or to study science. And so, then it comes back to all the philosophies of humankind, of what they think might have happened in the past and what they think might happen in the future. But we believe that with the Bible, we have a good firm foundation. And so today, what we want to look at is biology and design. And then tomorrow we're going to look at fossils. And the next day we'll look at evidence of the flood. This is by far, it's not enough to really equip people with a huge amount of information, but what it can do for all of you is to give you a starting point for further study, and it can help to be a starting place to help keep young people from getting smushed by that big semi of anti-God evolution. Obviously, 3 short Zoom presentations need to be supplemented with other things. So as we look at this idea of creation or evolution, of course, the Bible says that God created man in his own image, male and female. And evolution says, oh no, everything that came about by accidents and chance, mutation and natural selection, to go all the way from non-living molecules all the way on up to human beings, according to this evolutionary progression. Sometimes the biological evolution will deal with once you get the first living cell. Cosmic evolution starts with a big bang, and somehow even all of the chemicals came into existence, and they got together eventually to form living things according to this model of naturalism. Evolution is really the foundation of naturalism. Now, naturalism is a philosophy. It basically says we can explain everything we see in the universe based on just the natural processes that are going on, physical, chemical processes, and energetics. without God. That's the strict form of naturalism, or sometimes called materialism, that's all there is. But naturalism and evolution are not science. Naturalism and evolution, by the way, they're both philosophies, or evolution is a part of a naturalistic philosophy that's posing as science. We're always told in schools and in the media and so on that evolution is scientifically proven fact. Well, really it isn't, because in the first place, you could never really go back and demonstrate it by totally scientific means. And so it's an idea or a philosophy or man's idea about how the universe came into existence and how life came into existence and how we get all the diversity we see today in living things.
Well, let me demonstrate why I say evolution is more philosophy. Think about the Big Bang. The Big Bang. Here's the Discover magazine, which is 100% committed to naturalism. They don't use the design word. It says, where did everything come from? And here's the quote right there on the front cover of their magazine. The universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Zero, nada. And as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. How was that possible? Good question, isn't that? Then they go on to explain some kind of a theory that really doesn't explain much of anything whatsoever. And so nothing exploding. Does that sound like science? Philosophical concept of how you might get the universe without any creator God? I say it's philosophy. It's posing as science, but it's not really science whatsoever. You know, here's naturalism at work. First of all, you see the Big Bang as a speculation, but think about the origin of life, where you're supposedly going to start from all this non-chemicals being hit by lightning, or you might say molecules being hit by lightning, and you get bigger molecules that line up like beads on a string. So these are amino acids, plus just in the right combination, those are proteins, and presto, like a magic wand, you have life, right? And so according to Franklin Harold, who's been a professor at Colorado State University, he said, we must concede there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical or cellular systems, only a variety of wishful speculations. Well, that is true. And basically, however, just prior to that, and in the same breath, in other words, he said we should reject, as a matter of principle, the substitution of intelligent design for the dialogue of chance and necessity. What's he saying? We've got to accept only naturalism. And this is the best we have right now, which is speculation. And so that's, and then maybe they refer to the Stanley Miller experiment, Urey Miller. Anyhow, they produce simple amino acids in the laboratory. Wow. The newspapers and the textbooks claim life produced in a test tube. Well, no, they didn't really produce a life at all. In fact, amino acids are not life. They even had the wrong types of amino acids, kind of types of amino acids that would bind each other up and give you a little tarry looking thing, but not life. It wouldn't do any good. And the very same environment that they were producing amino acids in, by the spark of lightning, they would call it, would destroy the products at a rate a whole lot faster than they're produced. And that's why you see at the bottom of their diagram this thing called a trap. They had to get the materials out of that environment as soon as possible, and basically in order to preserve them. But yeah, they produced amino acids, but it's not just the product you have to be interested in getting. You have to arrange it in exactly the right way. And I'll get to that in just a bit. So more wishful speculations. Life was seeded on Earth by aliens. Now, why did they come up with that in the first place? Because they realized the conditions on Earth are not conducive to producing life spontaneously. And then the other one's possible wishful speculation. Life evolved in a hot pool, such as what you find there at Yellowstone and Old Faithful and Morning Glory pools. Perfect spot for life, but they haven't produced it. But in 2018, somebody said, aha, they've detected amino acid in the oceanic hydrothermal vent system, way down deep, that evidently came from non-biological sources. And that particular amino acid, tryptophan, what's so special about it? Well, it's one of those amino acids that they say is necessary in order to produce proteins, which eventually would produce cells. Well, it turns out that proteins don't make cells. Cells and what's going on in the internal working of the cell is what's going to produce the proteins. And so tryptophan, yeah, that's pretty important. But keep in mind one thing, what you're trying to produce are proteins. And you have to have several, quite a number of amino acids all present, not just one. And so each one has to be lined up in exactly the right order in order to have a working protein. So that's why I say the order is paramount. If you get it in the wrong order, or if you get the wrong amino acid, it could be lethal. It's not going to be a working protein. So basically, it's a faith statement to think that lightning hitting these chemicals, and these chemicals are going to get to line up in exactly the right order to make a working protein. Yeah, it's a lot of faith. What's the probability of getting that one protein by accident? Here it is right there. One chance in 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, 260 times. That's not very likely. It's more likely to fill up the entire known universe with marbles, paint one blue, and then find it accidentally, if you go out in a spaceship, 3 times in a row. If you could find that marble in the universe 3 times in a row, that's 100 million times easier than making the one simple protein. And so that doesn't sound very likely, does it? Well, that's not even a cell. This proteins plus 1,000 other things makes a cell. And the chance of making a cell was calculated by an atheist and an agnostic as one chance in 10 times the cell, 40,000 times. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen at all. In fact, the atheist and agnostic who calculated it said it was more likely for a tornado to sweep through a junkyard and produce a Boeing 747 than it was to make that cell. Yeah, then they said there must be a God. Well, that's the logical conclusion, isn't it? But they said, we're still looking for a way around our conclusions. And the reason is they're chained to the idea of naturalism. And the idea of naturalism, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. You see, students are being put in a box when all they can look at is naturalism, right? Without ever considering there may be a designer God. That's what naturalism will do. And we see that in schools, university, all over. They're only teaching naturalism. So the graduates of those schools, what do they go on to teach later? Naturalism. That's all they've ever heard. And so they think in order to be a good scientist, you have to believe in naturalism. Everything can be explained without God, and don't you dare allow God in the picture. Okay? And other things on naturalism, the odds that I mentioned, how can you explain it away? Well, George Wald, clear back in 1954 in Scientific American said, time is in fact the hero of the plot. We have 2 billion years to play with. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One has only to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. Well, if you do the calculations, you found that George Wald was probably off by a factor of 10 times 10 times 10, 139 times. So that's not going to happen, is it? Okay. And it turns out, again, as I said, evolution is not science. It's a philosophy, posing as though it were science. Colossians 2:8 is very clear. Listen to the emphaticness of it. See to it, see to it, that no one takes you captive through philosophy. If evolution and naturalism is a philosophy, don't be taken captive by those, okay? It's very important because the number one reason students give for rejecting the gospel is evolution. But it's also the main reason students end up leaving the church, and the attrition rate from churches of their graduates, these are evangelical church kids, 72 to 85% have nothing to do with the church after they graduate. That's sad, but that's the state of affairs right now. Why are they dropping out? Because they're not prepared. They're not prepared to be able to face that evolution and a God philosophy semi. It's going to run them over. And there's a high attrition rate. And that's why this creation versus evolution crash class is meant to help young people and adults to keep from getting run over. Okay? We hope that we can help people stand firm on the Word of God. Go ahead, Mary Jo.
When we look at this whole issue of creation and evolution, it's really impacted a lot by worldview. And what we mean by that is, kind of an analogy, is the filter through which you look at the world, the filter through which you look at the data in science and so on. And your worldview does affect your interpretation of the data. Your worldview affects your interpretation of data. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, we can have two very good scientists looking at the very same piece of data, and one will go, wow, isn't evolution wonderful? And another will look at it and go, what an awesome creator we have. And you see, it's based on the way in which we have learned to view this world, and whether we view it through a humanistic, naturalistic glasses, you might say, or whether we're willing to open the door and allow for the potential of a creator. So when we look at these two, creation and evolution today, what we want to do is take a look from a biblical point of view, but also biological point of view, and look at some of the supposed evidences of evolution. And then we're going to show you how we can reinterpret that evidence from a view that is more consistent with what Scripture says. Three of the broad categories are change, similarity, and junk. We're going to deal first with change, because the word evolution simply means change. And so then you have to ask some questions. How much change are we talking about? And what kind of change are we talking about? Are we talking about mega evolution, which is really the molecules to man idea, that we can go all the way from molecules to get to human beings? Or are we talking about macroevolution, which is more the development of new body types in structures? Or are we talking about microevolution, which is much smaller variation, much smaller kinds of changes? And in fact, we would look at these microevolution and we would say that we really believe that microevolution fits very well within a creation model. God told the animals and the plants and human beings at the end of the creation week that to multiply and to fill the earth. Now, if you're going to fill the earth, you have to have some room for variation amongst these creatures as they spread out. It's like with the dogs. You can see big dogs, you can see little dogs, Chihuahuas, St. Bernards, Dalmatians, all sorts of dogs, and you see variation, but they're all part of that initial dog created type, or the dog kind, you might say. So when we look at some of the common evidences of evolution, are they really evolution in action, or are we just seeing evidence of variation within a kind? We could look at the finches. The finches are one of the most historic, I guess you might say, evidences. Darwin went to the Galapagos Island. He observed finches with different sizes and shapes of beaks. He supposed they had come from common ancestors, which had flown over from South America. But the question is, why is there so much variation then? Well, there's been quite a bit of research done on these. And as it turns out, when you look at the variation within these finch groups, yes, indeed, there can be variation in the beak sizes and shapes. It seems to be somewhat related to the environmental conditions each year or over a broader period of time. But what do you end up with? You start out with finches, and what do you end up with? You end up with finches. Nothing fundamentally new. If indeed you want to demonstrate evolution in progress, you really need to be able to show how you got birds in the first place, or how did you get finches? But all we're seeing here is variation within that created finch kind. Same thing is true with the peppered moths. Are they really evidence of evolution? Well, you start out with moths, you end up with moths. There's nothing fundamentally new. Now, what they did show was that there was a difference in the amount of white ones compared to dark ones, or dark ones compared to white ones. And that apparently, they said, changed. However, further research has shown that that kind of variation was always there. There were light ones to start with and dark ones to start with. And so we're just seeing a minor change there, if anything at all. But then when you really look at it, you find out they had to stick these things onto the bark of the tree, on the tree trunk, because normally they don't rest on the tree trunks. They normally fly around at night. During the daytime, they rest up in the foliage of the trees. And I think really, as you look into the details here, you find out that it's really just a fraudulent piece of evidence. Even if it was true, it would be just minor changes. Jonathan Wells did a good job back in 2002 in the book Icons of Evolution, showing that this peppered moth idea was just a myth. He was laughed at for that. But then the Journal of Evolutionary Biology in September 2012 basically confirmed Jonathan Wells's ideas. And so, excuse me, it may be in textbooks and so on, maybe in museums still, and you'll see it in the media, but it's not a good evidence of evolution at all. What about antibiotic resistant bacteria? That's another one that's really been talked a lot about today. And we hear about viruses too, we hear about these things evolving. Well, yes, they're changing somewhat. The population changes, but what are they? They're still the same. You start with bacteria, you end up with the same kinds of bacteria, nothing fundamentally new. And so what we're seeing here also is variation within that created kind, but not the kind of evidence you would need to really demonstrate how you can go from goo to you by way of the zoo. And we would really need much more evidence for that. People will say, oh, you find it in the fossil record. Well, Dave will deal with that tomorrow. What about Darwin and his ideas about races? We hear so much about racism in our society today. Darwin actually thought that all the various races of people had come from different groups of apes and monkeys. And in fact, when one of our couple of our staff guys, Rich and Lanny, went to Africa, they had pastors, black pastors down there that came and asked, well, what kind of monkey do you come from? Because they had been taught this Darwinism. And so Rich explained to them, no, we can get all the variety of skin colors very, very quickly. And we really are only one human race. If you remember your high school biology, taking Punnett squares, this would show with the heterozygous parents or the maximum variation in the parents, you can get all the way from lightest light to darkest dark in one generation. It doesn't take millions of years. You're not starting with different kinds of monkeys. You're starting with human beings with varying amounts of the pigment called melanin. Like Ken Ham says, we're all brown. It's just how much of that brown do we have? And so what we see sometimes, you can even see this in a single family. This is an actual case with a medium skinned parents. And look, they have one little girl that's very dark and one that's very light. And as they grow up, you can see those differences maintained. Well, Darwin called these people in Africa and the black races, he called them to be savages. Well, that's, which of these are going to be called savages? They're beautiful women. And so what we're seeing here is the variation within skin color is possible very, very quickly. It does not take millions of years. And I believe it was built right in from the creation, that God built in a great deal of diversity. And by the way, I just read an article in Answers in Genesis just a week or two ago. They were saying this is simplified. There are many, many, many more factors that enter in to give us the many variations we have today. But even on a very simplified level, you can see how you can get the various skin colors. Well, the perfect historical time for that to happen would be after the time of the Tower of Babel. As different family groupings went in different directions, some of them may have tended more towards the darker skin. Some may have tended more toward the lighter skin. And when you start then breaking down that human population by isolation and separation, you can find out you can get the skin colors cemented into different groups very quickly. And you can play around with Punnett Square if you like things like that. I had a good time playing around with it to see how we could get light cemented into a population, or dark, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Well, the main proposed mechanisms of Darwin in evolution is mutation and natural selection. Mutation are mistakes, basically, in the genetic information. It's a mistake. And then survival of the fittest, or natural selection, is supposed to select for the good mistakes. Problem is, there's more bad mistakes than good ones, okay? But it turns out that neither mutation nor natural selection are creative mechanisms. So that's not going to give you the information. These mutations and natural selection can only operate on things that are already in existence. Okay, so you have to have it there before you can even select for anything. But what do we see when we look at mutations? They might produce two-headed snakes. They can produce a cow with an extra leg. It's not going to help. And many observation on fruit flies. What do you get? Fruit flies with deformed wings, etc., shriveled up. They're not better. They're not at all. And usually you find out that they can't fly sometimes. Like, for instance, we finally were able to make a fruit fly with 4 wings. Oh my goodness, this sounds really good. Except for one thing, it couldn't fly. So no, it would be weeded out very quickly, wouldn't it? But so mutations really aren't that beneficial. Otherwise, if they were, let's all sit in front of some nuclear experimentation and nuclear bombs and see if we can evolve into better human beings, right? No, the observed results of mutations are a duplication of information, copy errors, we copy it twice, a loss of information, a piece of it is out that was really important before, a deregulation of genetic information, aging and death. Guess what? These mutations are going the wrong way. You're not going to go uphill, you're going downhill. And that's exactly what Dr. John Sanford was saying in his book called Genetic Entropy. Entropy P is a measurement basically of a downhill effect, of the disorder of a system. And so he called this mutation and natural selection primary axiom of Darwinian evolution. If that's how evolution works. He says, doesn't work. That's based on his research over many, many years. Now, John is not any slouch when it comes to genetic research. He's a retired Cornell University professor, genetic researcher, 70 plus scientific articles, 25 patents under his belt. He's co-inventor of the gene gun process. So you understand, he knows his stuff. And he
he's a
said,
very humble man to boot.
he really is. He really is really a good gentleman, and I appreciate him so much. In fact, we just saw him last month or thereabouts. He said this in his book, Careful Analysis on Many Levels. You understand, he's a researcher. Consistently reveals that the primary axiom is absolutely wrong. What's the primary axiom? Evolution proceeds by mutation coupled with natural selection. He said it's wrong. He says mutational entropy, the downward amount, appears to be so strong, especially within large genomes, that selection should not be able to reverse it. It's too much downhill going on. He said it is now clear that mutation selection cannot stop the loss of genomic information. So mutation selection clearly could not create the genome. So he said then, kind of in a summary here, if mutation selection can't prevent the degeneration of the genome, then the primary axiom is wrong. It is not just implausible. It is not just unlikely. It is absolutely dead wrong. It is not just a false axiom. It is an unsupported and discredited hypothesis or idea which can be confidently rejected. So any student needs to understand that when we hear a teacher say evolution proceeds by mutation and natural selection, we can reject that according to major amount of research that Dr. John Sanford has done. Well, you might have heard not too long ago, pretty recently, that they have seen, quote, evolution of E. coli bacteria. And basically, they found out that if these bacteria were in a citrate environment, that they weren't doing too well. However, after 31,500 generations, they've been doing this experiment over and over and over. They were evolved to be able to use citrate. Wow, this is important. This is evolution in action. These number of generations would lead me more like 630,000 years for humans. And so to get one mutation that allowed a citrate use. It turns out that when you actually look into the research, it's broken. It turns out this was a downhill mutation. In order to work, a working system had to be broken. So it's not going uphill, it's breaking something that works well. And so it's a downhill thing that allowed it. And when we see a lot of these claims, oh, evolution has proven this, ask the question, is this something new or is it a broken system? And every time it is a broken system, and that's what it appears like right there. So we ask a question, can mutations produce complex arrangements of parts and orders in insects to produce a bombardier beetle? Could it happen? Well, first of all, John Sanford says, no, mutations don't work. Mutations coupled with natural selections. But think about the bombardier beetle. First of all, that little tiny beetle, you may have heard us talk about this frequently in the past, mixes two chemicals together, and they have not only the chemicals, but a chamber, a mixing chamber, several sets of valves, a explosion chamber, and when it's all said and done, it can shoot boiling hot water temperature liquids and gases into the face of an approaching frog. Wow, this is amazing. Can you imagine the first beetle that tried it? Went to the chemistry lab, didn't have all this mechanism. He started mixing chemicals and finally got the right chemicals by accident. So you got a better beetle, you got a dead beetle. And for millions of years, you have beetles blowing themselves up. And that's not going to advance the cause for evolution at all. Because in order for the system to work, you not only have to have the chemicals, but you have to have exactly the right system that'll work with those chemicals. This is an engineering problem that an engineer will be able to look at and say, that didn't happen by accident. That's been designed that way. So that's the bombardier beetle. Looks designed, not the process of evolution. But naturalism says this: we can imagine mutations and natural selection acting over millions of years might refine or produce systems. See, that's the hope of naturalism, that maybe you get enough mutations, you got a few good ones, and they preserved and eventually end up with very complex systems. I don't see that. I see the complex interrelationship of parts as evidence of design, engineered system. One of my favorite butterflies happens to be the blue morpho. Blue morpho butterfly. And what I like about that blue morpho butterfly is it's not blue. What? I can see blue. No, it's not blue. It's actually the way light comes in and reflects, etc., that's going to change the upper part of that particular wing to look a very intense blue. You look at the underside of that blue morpho and you find out that's the same butterfly. You wouldn't expect that, would you? All right, so the scales on the upper surface of the blue morpho are actually colorless proteins called chitin, okay? And the wing has no pigment for the color blue. It has no pigment whatsoever. So how does it get such an intense, gorgeous blue? Well, each one of the scales happen to have these little layers in it. These layers are called laminae. And what happens is these particular arrangement of these layers that look like the limbs of a Christmas tree gives what's called a constructive interference. The light comes in, and not only is everything is screened out except for the color blue. So it comes in from the light, and it's actually reflected and amplified out. Oh, wow. Constructive interference. And according to Bill Browning, who's a engineer, the spacing of the lamina must be precisely controlled to a certain fraction of the wavelength, 1/8 of the wavelength. Approximately millions of these layers of laminae are meticulously arranged with incredible accuracy on the wings. If you get them out of space just a little bit, it doesn't work. Okay? It's got to be precise. All right. Now you can look at that and look on our website under our Think and Believe and look for blue morpho or just morpho, and you'll see an article that Bill has written, and we published it in Think and Believe. And so I like this part of it. What does this one show you? When you look at tremendous design of the blue morpho, that an airline pilot from way up in the sky can see a blue morpho because of the intense magnification of the light. What do you have to say? When you understand the complex arrangement of everything, you say the works of the Lord are great, sought out of all of them that have pleasure therein. His works are to be remembered. Psalm 111. Amazing, isn't it? I love those blue marvels. I'll talk more about those tonight, by the way. I'm going to be talking about the amazing design features that you find in Costa Rica. And that's this evening, starting at 6 o'clock Mountain Time, 7 o'clock Central. And so, what are we looking at to see these amazing designs? Our eyes. It's amazing how complex they are, too. And all the muscles working together in the lenses. One of our guys we were working with down in Costa Rica is an eye surgeon, actually, and he basically will talk an hour on just the cornea of the eye, let alone all the other amazing things. He loves talking about that. And so, anyhow, what do we see here is everything looks designed, doesn't it? But what does naturalism say? We can imagine how mutations and natural selection, acting over millions of years, might refine or produce systems. Have you heard that before? Oh, yeah. We hear it over and over again. Mutations and natural selection. And given enough time, anything can happen, including the eye, including all the precise arrangements of those laminae on the butterfly. You can imagine all you like, but that doesn't make it happen. Okay? So, what other answers do evolutionists provide for the eye? Richard Dawkins, an atheist, said, that's not good design. It's absurd design. In fact, he said there's massive material right in the line of vision. Move it over to the side, you'd be able to see better. Problems with that? If Richard Dawkins walks outside on a nice, bright, sunny day with the eye design like he says it should be, he'd be blind in about 2 hours. So God knows what he's doing. Perfect, wonderful design. Think about computers. They're amazingly designed. But you know what? It won't come anywhere close to what your brain can do. Your brain is so much better. You might look at your brain as like being a motherboard of a computer. It's even more complex than that, too. There are more there are more connections in one brain than there are switches and routers in all the internet connections in the world. Figure out how many. Think about how many stars are out there in our Milky Way galaxy. That's a bunch. But now multiply that number of stars by 1,500, and you'll get close to what the number of synapses in a brain are equal to. And all this happened by accidents? Thinking is allowed, you know.
I don't think it happened by accidents. Do you?
I don't think it happened by accident. Doesn't look at it. But what does naturalists say? Naturalism. Perhaps an early cell, billions of years ago, got to have the time in there, developed a sensitivity to other cells. Then it is conceivable it'd be on its way to becoming a human brain. Boy, that's a hope of naturalism, isn't it? Perhaps and conceivable are not scientific words. It's a guess. Wishful speculation, isn't it? So we heard that earlier. Again, it is quite an amazing thing, and I can't think that naturalistic explanations are going to explain all of these features. But, you know, all of these naturalistic explanation rely on the heroes of time. Given enough time, anything can happen, you might hear. Now you couple that with mutation and selection, presto, you get all this amazing magic wand of evolution, producing things that beyond our own creative capacities, by the way. But keep in mind, according to John Sanford, mutation and selection as a mechanism can be confidently rejected. It just doesn't work. All right. So anyhow, go ahead, Mary Jo.
Yes, if you want more information, I would recommend Sanford's book on genetic entropy if you want to get into more of the details of what he has to say.
We have that here at the office. We take that with us when we speak at various places. Okay.
Summary of that section about change, though, is as mechanisms for evolution, mutation and natural selection, we can just say no. They cannot explain the origin of new kinds of living things. They do operate, they are processes, but they can't explain how do we get such diversity and such design in living organisms. Well, so let's look at the next one, the supposed evidences of evolution. What about the idea of similarity? Similarity just means that we can look at various forms of living things and we can see that they are similar in some ways. Classic example that's used of similar homology or similar form in the man's arm, the dog's leg, the bird's wing, and the whale flipper, and showing that there's a combination of bones, of one bone or two bones in the arm part, and then many in the wrist, and so on. And so they say we get these things because of evolution. These similarities indicate that there was a common ancestor. But let's think of some other potential reasons why we might have similarity. Perhaps that similarity is there because they were designed for a similar function. So it's like variation on a theme. The chair in your living room is different than the chair at your dining room table, is different from the seat in your car, but they all have similarities because they were designed for a same function, sitting on. Another reason why there may be that kind of similarity is they were designed by the same designer. We have one God, one creator, not a whole pantheon of gods. If there was a pantheon of gods, we might not expect that kind of similarity. Everybody would be doing what they could on their own. But this indicates we have one creator. And then another explanation is that they are designed to work together. They have to live in the same ecosystem, the same universe. They utilize the same chemicals. The processes of chemistry and physics work the same in all these various creatures. And so there are certain parameters that living things have to conform to in order to even be alive. And so there are explanations why things might be similar that are different than the explanation of mutation by natural selection. Here's another example where they're showing you the similarity here of the human embryo at about 2 months in development and comparing that to things you would find in a fish. So they'll say, look, you had gill slits and a yolk sac and a tail during that period of your evolution. And as we look at it, we find out, wait, the gill slits, they're not gills and they're not slits. They never operate as gills. They're not functioning in respiration. They're little pouches that form the structures in the neck and jaw region of the human being. They're not gills at all. What about the yolk sac? It doesn't contain yolk in humans. What it does is to make the first blood cells for that baby till it's big enough to make the blood in the bones and so on. The part they label tail is simply the end of the spinal column. It's got to end someplace. It grows a little more quickly during this period of development than the rest of the baby, and then it's enclosed in the rest. But what I want you really to see here is the bias that comes in even in the labels that they're given. Why would you call them gill slits? Why would you call it a yolk sac and a tail, except trying to show, again, the similarity of our supposed ancestors in the fishes way back in time. So problems with that. That same idea has been utilized by Ernst Haeckel. He was one of Darwin's strong proponents back in the late 1800s. He had this idea called the biogenetic law, or if you want the real technical term, it's ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which is a big mouthful. but all it really means is that the idea was that as the human baby developed inside of the mother's womb, it would repeat the stages of evolution. And then he had diagrams like this just showing how similar these creatures are at that stage. But the problem is, when you really look at it, there are many differences that you never see, or that you do see, that you can actually observe. And a trained embryologist can observe the differences from very early on in development. And so Ernst Haeckel's ideas have been debunked. They've been fraudulent, and yet they still show up in books, sometimes in museum articles and displays and so on. We can just say no to this whole idea of the evolution of the similarities in the development indicating stages of evolution. Doesn't work that way. The one they're using a lot today is biochemical similarity or homology. And they look at things like DNA and the structure of the DNA or the RNA or the protein, the lineup of amino acids and proteins. And from those similarities in chemicals, they try to come up with the tree of life, that famous evolutionary tree of life. Things that are closer related, they say, are going to share more DNA. Then they give you something like this. This was published in Time magazine way back in 2006, but it said how we became human. And in that article, it says chimps and humans share almost 99% of their DNA. Well, what is that true? And even if it is true, does that mean that that we evolved or that we have some biological similarity? Well, over time, there's been more research done, and that figure of 99% has gone down, 93.5%, and now 86 to 89% is conservative. And Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins says it may be as low as 70 or 71% similarity between monkeys or apes and humans. And so there's still a lot of debate about that. But so what? This is from a museum display that we went to. It said the mouse was 97.5% similar to human beings in their DNA. The zebrafish, 92%. And I like this one, bananas, 50%. So did we evolve from bananas? All it's really doing is showing that there are similarities in these various organisms. And I think that fits very nicely with a design argument, because if you think about it, the designer, like a good engineer, takes the same structural principles, utilizes them where they fit, comes up with innovative and creative ideas where they don't work together, and so on. I like this. Well, they said creationists are going to love this article. This was Darwin was wrong. It's called Uprooting the Darwin's Tree. And I believe that was back in 2012. It came out. But as you look at this article, it showed one of the very first, or 2009, I guess it was. They showed in there Darwin's sketch that he put in his journal of what he thought might happen, how things might have all come from a common ancestor. Problem is, over time, that's been demonstrated to be false. He was just sketching out his ideas, And here's some quotes from this article. He says, for a long time, the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life. A few years ago, it looked as though that grail was within reach, but today the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. What's the negative evidence they're talking about? It's actually developments in the whole research into DNA. And so as they looked at the DNA and at the complexity of the DNA and the way that it works, they said that the DNA itself is evidence against this kind of Darwinian evolution. The article goes on to say, the tree of life, one of the iconic concepts of evolution, has turned out to be a figment of our imagination. Now, again, they tell you evolution is science and creation is religion. But here we're reading words like imagination. They say we have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality. well, wait a minute. Why is it in the books and museums and on the TV shows and so on if there's no evidence? It is a hypothesis. It's an idea. It's a philosophical idea, really. I love this. They said biology is vastly more complex than we thought, and facing up to this complexity will be scary. I don't find it scary. I find it really exciting, the complexity that we see. We do not have to be afraid of real scientific research. The research, the facts, the actual data, I believe, point very strongly to a creator. And so we see this tree of life being cut down by science itself, by the science of intelligent design and the study of the DNA. It's coming down.
Okay. Well, one other potential argument for evolution has been junk. And at one time, they said they had a whole bunch of things that are leftovers in the human body that's left over from millions of years of evolutionary development. I think that one time they had 180 different things that they claimed was junk. Well, guess what? That list has been chopped, chopped. Now they have a few main ones they talk about. The pituitary gland being one of those. Guess what? Pituitary gland is one of the master glands of the Bible or of the body, and it's used in regulation of so many of the other glands in the body. The thymus, the tonsils, the appendix, all for immunity. And when you hear people giving an argument for evolution, they usually say, what about the appendix? All right. Well, it has a very important function, and that is when you get violently sick and you basically are losing out both ends, you need something to recharge your digestive tract. Turns out the appendix is a safe harbor for beneficial bacteria, and that'll recharge the rest of the system. What about wisdom teeth? Oh, what's going on here? Well, wisdom teeth have a valuable function too. It's called chewing. Okay, it's not a leftover at all. Now you hear this claim too. 98% of our DNA is junk, leftover from millions of years of evolution. Mary Jo, actually in a lecture at one time, made a prediction. When they do more research, you're going to find out it's not junk. Why? Because God doesn't make junk, does he? All right. So
sure enough, that prediction came true. It is not junk. It's verified now. Sanford in his book says it's becoming increasingly clear that most or all of the genome is functional.
right.
In other words, the sections of the DNA that they said did not have a function were not important. They said they were leftovers from evolution, and yet they're not. Jonathan Wells, again, has a book called The Myth of Junk DNA. You can get a hold of that if you'd like. And then back in 2012, there was an international consortium with 300 genetic researchers from all over the world. And their purpose in doing this research was to look at, is it really junk DNA, or do these sections that they call junk, do they have a true function to them? Here's what they said. At the end of that time, they said almost every nucleotide is associated with a function. They kept on. They said the metaphor of junk isn't that useful. And what they were showing was that, excuse me, these sections that were listed as junk really have a purpose. They said the key point is it is not junk. And so, some of the things, there's a whole long list of things that they found that were important functions of these so-called junk DNA strands. But what it really is, some of them were for repairing DNA. Whoops, go back. Assisting in DNA replication, regarding DNA or regulating DNA transcription, aiding in folding of chromosomes. And by the way, that's extremely important, the way in which these chromosomes are folded is precise. It's also used in aiding in the maintenance of the chromosome itself, controlling RNA editing and splicing. You couldn't even make a protein if you didn't have something like that. They're important in helping to fight disease and regulating embryonic development. Now, if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't even be here. So all these things that they said are junk are really not junk anyway. They're very, very important points, and they're very necessary for humans. In 2021, the article came out, Human Genome 20th Anniversary, Junk DNA Hits the Trash. That's probably where it should have been in the first place. There is no junk. DNA, when you look at it, I mean, what an amazing, amazing system. It's just like a computer program. And the more that we've looked at DNA, the more fantastically designed we see it is, the more complexity we see, not only on a level of just lining up the nucleotides, but the way that this DNA folds itself up is extremely important. And then time enters in also, as you find out that it has to be turned on and turned off at various precise times in an organism's metabolism. So junk DNA, no, it's not junk. And we can just say, for all these supposed evidences of evolution, the evidence that they have given us for change and similarity and junk, we can just say no. We believe that the creation and the fall explanation is much better and fits the facts much more closely than the Darwinian idea of evolution. But maybe we should give Darwin a little bit of, cut him a little slack here. He didn't know anything about DNA and proteins. He didn't know it takes DNA to make proteins and it takes proteins to make DNA. He'd never heard of Mendelian genetics, the simple genetic forms that were discovered and published just shortly after his theory. I've often wondered what he would have thought if he would have seen the work of Gregor Mendel. It explains so much of what Darwin was trying to explain by mutation or by natural selection. He didn't really even know about mutation because he didn't know anything about genetic shit at that point. He actually thought the cell was just a blob of protoplasm, when in reality, our studies today have shown that the cell is like a complex city. It's got everything you would need to harness energy, to release energy, to produce things like proteins and other forms of things we need in our body. Tremendously complex. And all the little organelles within the city that work in a very specific way. This is one of Dave's very favorite ones, so I'm going to let him talk about it.
Well, even 20 years ago, they didn't know the complexity of the cell. They had hints, etc., but it wasn't until the advent of extremely sophisticated techniques and electron scanning microscopes, the newest generations, they were able to see what is actually going on inside the cell. And we have basically the DNA and the unfolding of the DNA and the copy machine to copy a section of the DNA. And that little copy is an instruction handbook. That instruction then goes into these little polka dots on the ribosome here, or they're called ribosomes. And when that ribosome gets a hold of it, it takes that computer program and codes for the right amino acids in exactly the right place. Remember the probability against that. Okay. Yeah. It's not going to happen by accident. And then that finished protein, a string of beads, you might say, is then ushered out with a transport machine, let's call them UPS, transported into a folding machine, because the protein in of itself is not ready to do anything. But it goes into that precision folding machine, comes out as a folded protein, and now it's ready to do the project or the work that it was meant to do. And so it comes out. Now, again, all these steps included transport. We were calling on UPS all along, weren't we? And so it goes in from there, and now it goes to make a machine. But the thing is, a lot of people didn't realize it. But there is also the UPS guy I'm talking about is actually the Canadian transport system. And that basically is something that's walking down a highway carrying a bag of proteins to deliver it to various parts of the cell. It's like machines or nutrients for the cell. But what is this thing that he's walking on? That is a microtubule, and it's actually made up proteins put together. All these proteins are working together. This UPS guy is running down that microtubule highway, 100 steps per second, equivalent to me traveling 1,200 miles per hour. Okay. And what's going to happen? It's going to drop its load at various places because these proteins are labeled where they're going to go. And this bag of proteins, there are going to be 32 proteins to make a motor that's going to produce energy for you. Wow. This is very complex, but it's not the only motor either. There are over 20,000 types of, I'm going to call them molecular machines in humans. Now, these things are tiny. You can't even see them with a microscope. You might be able to get there an idea what's going on with a most advanced electron microscope, but they're so tiny. They're basically working on molecules and being fueled sometimes by protons, which you won't even have a chance of seeing. But Howard Berg from Harvard University talks about these machines and said these are the most efficient machines in the universe. Oh my. They're more efficient than electrical motors today. And there are more of these electrical motors in the world than in your body than there are electric motors and gasoline engines in the entire known world. And so very effective, very efficient. And so I think this is a great evidence of design. All right. I had just barely finished talking about this even in greater detail at a university. And there's a well-known atheist who actually said in the question answer time, I came here to hear evidence of design. If you don't give me evidence right now, I'm going to throw up all over the seat in the auditorium in front of me. That's what he was saying. We have an engineer that we know that shouted out at that point, give him a bag. All right. And basically, yeah. Why? This atheist, he is so hardened. Why? Because he not only believes in atheism, but he believes everything has to be explained by a naturalistic explanation. Nothing could possibly be there that would involve design. He wouldn't even use that word at all, and he wouldn't see it. And so I'm saying that he is committed to the idea of naturalism, but it's a philosophy. It's posing as science, but it's not actually science. Okay? I'd say the evidence cries out when you look around. Things were created with a design, whether it be the DNA or the morpho butterfly. And if you have an eye to see it and are not blinded, I think it's very obvious there is a creator God, and to find out who that God is. And so basically, that's this piece of the creation versus evolution crash class on the biology of design. And hope this helps a little bit to help people stand firm against the evolution and anti-God semi that is just destroying the faith of so many young people in our nation today. That was today. On Wednesday, tomorrow, we're going to have another session. This one is going to be Darwin and the fossils. Okay, Darwin and fossils, and 1 o'clock tomorrow. So stand firm against the evolution and anti-God semi. Okay, and if you want, tonight at 6 p.m., I'm going to be given another program for a creation group in Nebraska, and it's going to be the amazing evidence of design found in Costa Rica. A lot of people would be interested in this certain thing. And yeah, I will duplicate one thing for sure, the blue morpho butterfly, because there's where you can see them. All right. And then we give tours there, and what a blessing to be able to see those amazing creatures that God has made. Things are created with a design, and we know it. And so if you wish to know more about it, go to GPG, gpgf22.com, and there you can get a way to get access to that particular program tonight. It's, again, I believe it's a free one, but I'm the main speaker for it tonight. And if you like Costa Rica or want to know about Costa Rica, it's great to go to. By the way, do give creation tours in Costa Rica. Our next one is February 25, coming up this coming year. And we love talking about the design of Costa Rica and the amazing things Costa Rica offer. It's on the bucket list of so many people. All right. So we hope people will, when they take these tours, they'll discover creation and then not worship the creation, but worship their creator. All right. Yellowstone creation tours. We just finished several days ago the Yellowstone tours that we did for the summer. And there's for you and your family. We will have more of those tours in 2024. And if you want information about this, or even about the Costa Rica design program I'm doing at 6, a quick jot me an email and I'll try to get you more information. And so that's good. AOI at discovercreation.org be a good one to do if you want to do it right away. Otherwise, give it Dave Nutting at discovercreation.org. I'd say copy it in case Gail is not on the computer. Okay. We have a free newsletter, Think and Believe. I think everybody here knows about it. Again, AOI at discovercreation.org. All right. And that's our website too. And there's our phone number. So you can get more information all the way. And by the way, if you want to donate so that we can continue to do more of the research, etc., you can hit the donate button and specify where you want that to go to. We have a DVD series, special price for you is $35. That's 12 sessions plus a full color study guide. It's great for a lot of things that you can use it for. There's a DVD about the high-tech cell. Now, you've got to be technically minded to go for this. It's only $10. We have it at AOI. Here's Genetic Entropy, John Sanford. Call, and we can get you that book, okay? And then Family Devotions. Amazing. There's some good ones. Have You Considered is a great one. Without Excuse is another one as well. Again, call, and it's amazing price. And our ministry center, by the way, is a half block from Colorado Mesa University. And we're hoping to be able to train young people. We've just been converting our upstairs to student housing with the eye that half block away is Colorado Mesa University. And we're hoping to be able to train up others to help us be able to influence university students there, or come alongside of them so that they're not run over by the evolution, naturalist, anti-God philosophy semi-truck. Okay, so there's the information again. So God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm going to take a time for some question and answer.
So we hope you can come back tomorrow for the fossils, and I understand Dave's going to put a little bit about dinosaurs in there too.
Yeah, fossils and dinosaurs.
And then on Thursday, evidence of the flood, and that's my favorite lecture that he does. So be sure to miss that
Yeah,
one.
it's
Any
good.
questions? You can quit sharing your screen, Dave. There you go.
There we go.
I just interesting how evolution, what they're telling us right now will change 20, 30 years from now. We see that even in the past, like the junk DNA, they were teaching this, hounding it, and deceived a lot of people for many years. And now, they come out that it's just junk, but all throughout evolution, I mean, we know it's false, but it's like you can't trust what the world's saying.
Yeah.
Just because but God's word is never changing. And so,
and keep in mind one thing, Josiah, that a lot of the prediction and what hit the textbooks and the magazines about the percent similarity in DNA between us and chimpanzee, or the fact that we have so much junk DNA, those are predictions from a naturalistic viewpoint and belief in evolution. And basically assuming that ended up in a textbook as a fact. Now, they did some preliminary thing, but then again, they didn't look very deeply because they only looked at a little tiny piece of the DNA and says, based on this little tiny piece, guess what? Based on that, we're 95% similar based on that. But what if you take the whole of DNA? What if you look at junk DNA? Now we're at what Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins says, possibly as little as 71% similar. Okay, because so many differences.
Yeah,
but who knows?
That's a good observation. It keeps changing. The evolutionary theory keeps changing. The sad thing is that there are still some of these things that you just can't get rid of them out of the textbooks.
Oh my, yeah.
Some of them that have been in there forever, it seems like, and you can't get them out of the textbooks, even though they've been disproved. Well, like the one about the Ernst Haeckel's idea, that was disproven back in the 20s, and you still find it in museums and textbooks today. And so some of this stuff hangs around even after science has gone on and moved on past it. It's funny because what you just said but the Bible never changes. I was just telling Dave this morning, I just want to teach the Bible. It doesn't change. You don't have to keep up with all these latest developments in science all the time.
There's another thought that came to me when, Jesus said that in the end times, many would be deceived. And deception seems to be growing just exponentially. But the point I'm trying to make is, you're saying all this stuff is still in the textbooks and everything. As you were showing them, I remember them from when I was a kid in school.
Yeah.
And I think, I shouldn't be negative like this, but to me, in the times that we're in on the biblical calendar, this deception, no matter how much evidence is out there, no matter how reasonable, how logical, how obvious things are, this deception is just going to grow because it's tickling the itching ears. It's what people want to hear. If they believe the other way, then they have to acknowledge God, and that's the last thing they want to do.
Yep. Right.
So it's not even a matter of science. It's a matter of denying God, period.
That's right.
That's right.
The commitment to naturalism is what it partly is, because they don't want to believe in God, perhaps.
And part of the deception is to make you think it's science.
Yeah.
Instead of a belief system, where it really truly is a belief system. And I appreciate your point. They don't want to believe in God. And you read Romans chapter 1, and it says, professing to be wise, they became fools. Right. And so often that's the case. I mean, we're seeing so much more now about multiple universes. Well, it couldn't happen here, but maybe it could have happened if there's a infinite number of universes. Surely it could have happened someplace. All the lengths that people will go to avoid acknowledging the existence of God and their own need for God.
Yeah, it's frustrating that no matter how much you put in front of people, you know, the denial is still there. You know, when I never went to college, but when I was in school, in the 9th grade, one teacher said one 3-minute sentence in a lecture. And what he said was, well, as far as evolution versus creation goes, you know, who's to say if God didn't use, you know, millions of years to create? That was it. Everything else I was taught from the get-go was evolution.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Everything. Yeah. There was never any, and I, you know, I was raised in a mainline denomination that didn't get into any of that. Didn't encourage you to read the Bible, didn't, you know. And so I guess my whole point is, I don't know what what I feel in my heart is, yes, if people need to know the truth. The truth needs to be preached. This sort of seminar is so important. It's so important. But God is even bigger than that, because I got saved still believing in evolution.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. I did too.
And he can overcome it.
He can do that.
Yeah, he can.
So go ahead, honey.
Yeah, no, I'm just agreeing with what you're saying. God is bigger than all of this, and it really depends on your heart attitude. And you know, as we use the scientific evidence in apologetics and in helping people, we know that there have been many, many, many people who thought evolution was a proven science, and as a result, they wouldn't even look at the Bible.
Yeah.
And so I look at it this way: God uses all kinds of different means to reach people and to speak to their hearts and their minds. And we know this isn't the only way, but we know it's a huge deception for so many people to block them from even coming to a point where they can consider what the Bible has to say about who God is and what he wants to do in their lives.
They've so detrimentally and seriously defamed the Christian.
Yeah.
If there's a kid out there that, oh, that kind of makes sense, they're afraid to admit it because they don't want to be with those knuckle draggers.
Right. Yep.
Right.
And it's just, to say it's a spiritual war is, come on, of course it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
Definitely. What do you see from your generation, Josiah, from students you know, more your age bracket?
Yeah, no, I definitely see a lot of something too. I kind of something what Deborah mentioned too is I've heard people my generation, you know, they of course, you know, atheism, or they'll definitely stay on evolution, or some Christians they would say that God used evolution through billions of years, which we know he didn't, because that would ultimately you can't have sin before death, and that would destroy the whole Christ coming to die for our sins. That whole destroy everything. But yeah, my generation, it's definitely yeah, it's just very predominant, of course, in evolution, but just in a lot of other ways too. Something I've heard is if you tell a lie loud enough, strong enough, and long enough, people will believe it. And that is actually real. I mean, it's a good. I
think COVID proved that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also heard, and this is kind of true too. I heard someone say it's harder to convince somebody that they've been deceived than to deceive them. And I was like, you kind of think about that. And it's like, oh, because all throughout, like, your whole growing up years, you're taught, secular worldview that there is no God and that, evolution, everything happened. And so most people don't even question it. And so when you do stop and like go against it, people, my generation and just, people in general will, you're crazy. That can't happen. That's not science. But
yeah.
actually, like you guys kind of talked about today, it's a philosophy. It's not scientifically. So yeah, no, my generation, yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of junk in the school systems that they're still teaching. Even in Christian colleges, it's surprising how Christian colleges don't even have a good solid foundation in Genesis or just the beginning, or they'll compromise and accept more of the evolutionary so-called scientific evidence. So they try to like accept what the world's saying, but then tie it in with God, and that you can't do that. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, you'll find this interesting. I think back, we met a man who came up to us at a seminar, elderly gentleman. He said he was in school back in the 1920s. And he told me, oh, they taught evolution back then. They don't teach it anymore today.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, we look at it as if it's a modern issue, and it still is, but it started a long time ago. Dr. Henry Morris wrote a book called The Long War Against God. And that's really true that, human beings in their sin nature want to reject God, because that means if God exists, then they're accountable, and they just don't want to be accountable.
Right.
Yep.
So
even all the more as the day draws closer.
that's right. But the hope is, that as we continue to share the good news, share the truth of creation, and share the gospel with people, that there are those that God truly will reach out and save them. And we want to see many more. And my hope is that this generation of young people will get so tired of being lied to that they're going to demand truth. And when they hear that truth, it will just resonate in their hearts. They've been so lied to.
Yeah.
So that's my hope.